Thank you for that introduction, Steve. And I want to talk to you this morning about investment. I apologise to those of you who have bored with it before, but I'm going to go with it anyway. Yeah. So that's right. I think I might need my glasses. Will I need my glasses? I should have written this in bigger notes. Apologies for my lack of visual interest this morning. Right, so interest. Yes, that is part of what I wanted to talk about. How many people do you know keep their savings in the vaults of a bank or building society account? Yielding probably not very much. Perhaps some of you have investments in building society accounts and wonder why. I find that banks and building societies are very keen to sell you the benefits of ISAs and other tax-efficient vehicles. But sadly, you probably don't need them because they're never going to make any money. And almost certainly never going to cause you to pay any extra tax. So what's the answer? Or perhaps, actually at this stage, could I ask for 3 volunteers? You don't have to get up. Just indicate to me who you are. Right. Now I've got 2 so far. Did I have the third? David. Right, David, you're going to be the building society manager. If you could be you can be a mortgage borrower, and you could be a deposit investor. So now, apologies. So if the mortgage borrower, what are you looking for from your building society? What's your main objective?
The lowest possible rate. I don't want to pay too much.
You want a low rate.
I want a low rate, yeah.
And how about the investor?
As much money as I can get legally.
Right. Now, what about the manager of the building society? What are you looking for?
Profit.
Profit. And how are you going to get the profit?
By enticing people to put the money with us by giving them offers they can't them. And then all of a sudden, when the offers come, they're in for a bit like the Nationwide.
This could be a 20-minute one.
Yeah. What about? Yeah. Well, I didn't get any other volunteers. So, David, what's your view on interest rates? What are you looking for?
5% if I could get there.
Right. You're looking to take 5%.
Lend it as high as you can.
No, charge 5%.
You want to charge your charges of 5%. So realistically, you don't care whether the interest rates are high or low, do you? No. You're going to take something out of the middle.
Yeah, whatever the interest rate is, we'll have a margin.
Right. So that imbalance is really what I wanted to identify, and that is that that's why it doesn't work realistically, because you've got opposing forces. Let's look at investment in asset-backed investments, such as stocks and shares, or possibly even property to an extent. Interest matters. If you're saving money and you're looking to the future, probably have to look to the future. For example, if you invested, let's just dream about this. If you invested £10,000 a year for 20 years, and you got you invested it monthly, and you paid out £833 a month. That is right, isn't it, Martin? Yeah. And you achieved a 2% return over 20 years. That's probably massively higher than most of you are used to from your building societies in recent years. You'd achieve, after 20 years, a total of £215,000, 649, or rather £215,649. If you invested and managed to get an 8% return, which I have to say is probably a little optimistic, you'd double that. You'd be looking at a return after 20 years of £411,132. So the difference between effective investment and investment can make a very considerable difference. Going on to look at where you might get that sort of return, over the last 200 years, in every 5-year period, there's a 95% chance of beating deposit yields. And that's investing in the FTSE. The FT 100 index, which often referred to, represents the top performing the top performing 100 publicly quoted companies. But before we get into too many technicalities, over the last 20 years, the FT index, if you'd invested perhaps in a tracker fund, which invests in turn in the FTSE index, that would have yielded something like 5.4%, excluding dividend yield, over the last 20 years. And that would be, by most people's standards, a fairly low risk investment. I have to say at this point that investments can both go up and can go down. People worry about the stock market because, as you heard probably the other day, the news readers come on and say billions of pounds have been wiped off people's pensions and investments, and it causes great concern. But you tend to get very little mention of the growth that it probably bounced back and made the following day, or the day after that, or the week after that, or a few months after that. But gradually your investments will grow in a stocks and shares market. Why is that? Well, I'm not going to do the volunteer thing this time. Why is that? I imagine if you were let's say the manager of a factory making widgets that you or something more interesting that you that you're able to produce and sell. What's your motivation? Well, I think the main motivation of people involved in, well, as you all are, you're looking to make profit from your business. If you're a publicly quoted business, you're looking to make profit so that you can share it with your shareholders. You pay them what's called dividends. The dividend helps the return from the shares. It gives the shareholders an income, and the better the income, the more they're happy to invest in that company. That company may well have plans to grow, and by being attractive to shareholders, they can perhaps get the access to the capital they need in order to grow and become more successful. And at the end of the day, you may be also an investor in a number of stocks and shares. Your motivation is to get the most from those stocks and shares. So you're going to invest in the companies that are attractive and look as though they're going places. And hopefully, analysis will be carried out by experts who understand what to look for in those companies and indeed in the economies and the sectors of the economies that they're working. So that is where you're looking to differentiate between the 2% return and the 8% return, or perhaps in difficult times you might be looking to minimize losses. I think the important thing is, though, that we're looking at long-term savings. If you've got money to put into investments in just for a short period, and you need that money for something specific, you wouldn't be looking at the long-term market unless you were very much able to take a lot of risk. Because the difficulty with the share market is that when the newscasters come on and announce the billions of pounds that have been wiped off the face value of shares, you don't want to be faced with having to sell them at that moment. I once met a retired bank manager who told me he'd absolutely no faith in the stock market, and I asked him why, and he said, well, I bought some shares when I retired, and within a few months, this was back I think in the 70s, I wasn't talking to him in the 70s, but he had been investing at a period where the markets plummeted somewhat. And I said to him, well, when the markets fell, what did you do? He said, well, I sold them as fast as I could. And this is a man who's been responsible for looking after people's money for the whole of his life. And he was obviously... I won't mention the name of the bank. I'm not sure it even exists anymore. But yeah, that is the mentality that you need to avoid, and you need to be cautious in the sense that if you're going to be investing for the long term, you can afford to bridge the gaps in the market where the market's fallen. You can afford to wait in the same way as if the value of your home or your house fell by 50%, you wouldn't wake up the next day and decide that the best thing to do would be to sell it there and then. You'd wait and feel that the likelihood is that things would recover, unless you're a total pessimist. Oh, that's unusual. So those are the sort of reasons why you ought to be investing in the stock market. The types of product available are very similar to the products that are available through the bank in terms of the tax efficiency. You can now put up to £20,000 into an ISA each year, assuming that you've got £20,000 to put into an ISA each year. You can also transfer ISAs from deposit accounts into stocks and shares ISA, and you can actually also do the reverse these days too. So they're a very flexible investment that gives you realistically a lifelong tax-free income. For those investors who would like to be paying less tax, then ISAs are a very good route in the long term. It is an interesting argument between that and the tax relief you get with pensions, but and both are equally valid. But I won't go into the complexities of that at this stage. But so yeah, if you want some guidance on investments, talk to an independent advisor who will be able to tell you not only where to get the best returns, but also where to get the best deals on products and hopefully the lowest charges for investment. That's Dave. No, I don't have to do that bit, do I?
You do it,
Just checking whether you remember who you are, though.
Nah, yeah, well, I've done that earlier. So, are there any questions?
What do you consider long-term for a long-term investment?
Really, more than 5 years. 5 years would be a sort of a minimum. Actually, it is interesting that the FSA used to say that that it can be a good idea if you're investing for 5 years and longer to be in the stocks and shares market. If you, but the FCA these days are pretty insistent that if you've got money that is invested for 5 years, it should be, or certainly a proportion of it should be in stocks and shares. Otherwise, the other danger, of course, is that inflation. You know, we talk about the returns that you get from deposit accounts being, I don't know, 0.5% perhaps. Very little anyway. But we've got the overriding factor of inflation running at, what is it, 2.8%, something like that. So you can see that the actual, you've got to keep your money working, otherwise you're actually losing value.
So what about ISA? What's the return? What's the interest rate on an ISA then? If you're saying ISA is good.
You're thinking probably in terms of a cash ISA. I'm thinking in terms of an ISA as being a vehicle in which to invest, an investment vehicle as opposed to a specific investment. ISAs tend to be regarded, you tend to look for ISA rates, and ISA rates are based on deposit accounts, and you'll fall into the trap that David was identifying, I think, which was that the ISA rates, headline rates, are broadcast by the advertising department of the banks or building societies, and they say, come to us and you'll get 3%. And what they're hoping is that you'll leave that money with them. The 3% headline rate will disappear and it'll change into a 0.03% return, and you won't notice.
12 months.
Exactly.
And they're normally drip fed as well. You can only put into them monthly.
Yeah.
So if you can put max 250 into them, really, you're only ever going to get 3% or 1,500 quid.
But the good news is that when you've done that, you can transfer them into something that would be more lively and a bit more adventurous, a bit more interesting.
I mean, those investments you did for me are pretty good.
Thank you, Dave.
Got the Hawthorne one last week.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
Still there. Yeah.
yeah, still working.
Any other questions?
So if you had a lump sum, David, what would you do with it personally?
I'd talk to a very good independent financial advisor.
That's kind of worrying because you're supposed to be the.
Don't you worry, David's got a mirror.
Yeah,
And he can recommend a good one.
yeah. And I'm not quite at the age where I'm talking to myself, Simon. So.